Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the continuation of this incredible story. And be sure to write in the comments. What do you think? Do bloodline and upbringing influence a person's actions at a critical moment? Your opinion really matters to me, because this story touched me deeply. Friends, today I'm going to tell you a story that still gives me goosebumps. We're used to black and white movies. There are Nazi villains and there are partisan heroes. But life, as always, is more complicated. Picture this. 1944, Greece, the island of Paros. German occupation, gallows, fear. And suddenly, the island's commandant, a Luftwaffe officer, a man in the enemy's uniform, cancels the order to execute 125 people. And here's the craziest part. This officer's name was George von Merenberg, and he was the great-grandson of Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin. Yes, that very same son of Russian poetry. And this isn't just a coincidence. It's a story about how the memory of one's lineage, honor, and upbringing can outweigh the terrible machine of the Third Reich. Or, at the very least, make it malfunction. Genes versus the swastika. Who was he? Let's immediately untangle this incredible genealogy. Because when you learn whose blood flowed in this man's veins, you start to look at history in a completely different light. Pushkin and Natalia Goncharova had 4 children. Their youngest daughter, Natalia Alexandrovna, was a woman with a difficult fate. Her first marriage failed, and she left for Europe, where in 1868 she married Prince Nicholas Wilhelm of Nassau. But this was a so-called morganatic marriage, an unequal one. Therefore, their children did not receive a royal title, but a comital one, von Merenberg. Their son, George Nicholas, went even further in mixing bloodlines. He married Princess Olga Yurievskaya, and this, attention, was the daughter of Emperor Alexander II. That means their son, our hero George Michael, born in 1897, turned out to be the convergence of 2 great families. He was Pushkin's great-grandson and the grandson of a Russian Tsar. I'm detailing this on purpose because it's important. This wasn't just, there was a German guy. This was a man who absorbed Russian culture from childhood. Unlike his father, he knew the Russian language perfectly, visited Crimea with his mother, Yalta, and kept the brightest memories from there. Imagine a future Wehrmacht officer who, as a child, strolled along the Yalta embankment, absorbed the Russian spirit, saw the sea and the sun. The economic context, how inflation kills aristocrats. But life is a cruel thing. World War I broke out. Interesting fact. His father, George Nicholas, being a German officer, specifically arranged to be sent to the Western Front, just to avoid fighting against Russia. For that time, that was an incredible act. George Michael himself fought in France and was taken prisoner. And after the war came the Weimar Republic. I want to make a small digression here for those who think aristocrats always swim in gold. After World War I, Germany was hit by terrible hyperinflation. I've read memoirs. People hauled money in wheelbarrows to buy a loaf of bread. The Merenberg family's savings, all those bank accounts, simply devalued in a matter of months. And so our count, Pushkin's great-grandson and a Tsar's grandson, was forced to rent out rooms in his 5-room apartment just to survive. He dreamed of becoming a doctor, but life forced him to put on a uniform. This is an important point. He knew what need was, what it meant to lose status and be humiliated. It either hardens you or breaks you. George apparently was hardened by it, refusing the Sieg Heil and the Eastern Front. When Hitler came to power, dark times arrived for people like Merenberg. The Nazis couldn't stand the old aristocracy, considering it cosmopolitan and not national enough. And then there were also his Russian roots. In 1941, he was drafted into the Luftwaffe, but not to fly, into ground services. He ended up on the Eastern Front in Belarus. And here's where it gets really interesting. An officer who was supposed to be a model Nazi behaves completely differently. Archival data shows he was court-martialed twice. The first time, for refusing to greet his superiors with the Nazi salute, for not wanting to throw his arm up in that stupid Sieg Heil. The second time, for simply taking and desecrating a party emblem. Can you imagine the courage it took, in Hitler's army where a word in line could get you sent to a camp, to spit on ideology? Another incident that simply amazed me. In the winter of 1941 to 1942, he saved the lives of 3 young German pilots. They were about to be shot for, in general, trivial things. They complained that the winter uniforms were worthless, and the frosts were terrible, mind you, and told jokes about Hitler and Mussolini. That seems like a trifle now, but back then it was a sure path to being eliminated. Marenberg stood up for them, risking his career, and saved those kids. The command, apparently, thought, "God, deliver us from such a noble idiot," and they sent him far away, deep into the rear, to command the island of Paros in Greece. The place seemed like a quiet exile. Paradise Island turned into hell. When I read about Paros, I thought, well, the guy got lucky. He'll sit out the war under the palm trees. An island 20 by 13 kilometers, the Aegean Sea, sun, olive groves. But it wasn't like that at all. His predecessor was seriously wounded. The British landed saboteurs from a submarine, local partisans helped. They destroyed the airfield, cut communications. The Germans responded brutally. They caught a 23-year-old guy, Nicholas Stellis, who remained silent during interrogations, and hanged him publicly. But even that wasn't enough. An order came: execute 125 local men in reprisal for the sabotage. And the most cynical part, the occupiers suggested the Greeks themselves choose who would go to their deaths. And here's where Providence steps in. On the island is the Longovarda Monastery. The abbot, Archimandrite Philotheos Zervakos, a man of incredible holiness. He was beatified in 2006. The monks understand. If 125 people are executed, the island will rise up, blood will flow like a river, and the Germans will simply slaughter everyone. A conversation by the painting of Yalta. Marenberg couldn't just meet with the Greeks, that would be considered treason. But diplomacy worked. He received an invitation to visit the monastery. As a tourist, to see the art, the icons. He agreed. On July 23, 1944, he arrived at the monastery with guards and an interpreter. The monks, understanding the gravity of the situation, broke the fast. They slaughtered a lamb for the guest, brought out the best wine, olives, cheeses. They showed him the library, the workshops, and then the key moment happened. In the refectory hung a painting, an ordinary landscape. Marenberg stopped dead in his tracks and was silent for a long time. Then he said, "This is Yalta." It turned out that in his childhood, he often went to the Crimea with his mother and grandmother. Those were the happiest days of his life. The warm sea, the southern mountains, family, and now he was in an occupier's uniform on a Greek island, and before him hung a piece of a lost paradise. It seems to me that at that moment, something clicked. He remembered who he really was. Not just a Luftwaffe major, but a man with a Russian soul, with the memory of Yalta. To save at any cost. After dinner, Abbot Philotheos asked everyone to leave. They were left alone with the interpreter. And then a conversation began that could have cost both their lives. "Save these people," the elder asked. "I can't. I have orders," Marenberg replied. "Then put me on the list. Execute me instead of them," Philotheos said calmly. Can you imagine that? A priest ready to face certain death for his flock. A descendant of Pushkin looks into the eyes of a man voluntarily going to his Golgotha. Probably, at that moment, he saw the very spirit of sacrifice that his great ancestor wrote about. Marenberg made a Solomon-like decision. He said, "I will cancel the execution, but you must give me your word that there will be no more sabotage against my soldiers on the island." He didn't just save people. He made a gentleman's agreement. And amazingly, both sides kept it. Philotheos, possessing enormous authority, restrained the partisans from active operations, and Marenberg refrained from reprisals. Until the Germans left the island, no more blood was shed. The price of humanity. Of course, for such self-will, he was quickly removed from command and kicked out of the army without a pension. But the most amazing thing is that he wasn't shot. Why? I think his background played a role, and the fact that the war was already winding down, and perhaps there was unspoken respect from his colleagues. Because even among the Nazis, There were people who understood that killing 125 innocent people was beyond the pale. The war ended tragically for the Merenberg family. Their house in Wiesbaden was bombed by the British. The apartment was destroyed. He lived a hard, poor life, was ill, and fell into depression. He died in 1965 in Mainz, quietly and unnoticed. And here's what amazes me the most. He never told anyone this story. Not his wife, not his daughter. He just kept silent. The family learned about the heroic deed of their father and grandfather only 45 years after his death. When in 2010, the monks of Longovarda Monastery found Merenberg's descendants and told them the truth. He didn't write memoirs, didn't give interviews. He just did what he had to do and moved on. Elder Philotheos lived a long life and died in 1980 at the age of 96. And his day of remembrance in Greece is celebrated on July 23rd. Exactly the day in 1944 when that conversation that saved 125 souls took place. This story makes you think. We often talk about good Germans, about bad Russians. But life is always about people, about their inner choice. This man wore a Luftwaffe uniform, one of the most terrible uniforms in history. But inside that uniform beat a heart that remembered Pushkin, remembered Yalta, and didn't allow itself to turn into a beast. He didn't shoot. He didn't kill. He just did what a human had to do. Now, friends, a question for you. What do you think, if it weren't for that Pushkin's blood in his veins, if it weren't for the childhood memories of Russia, would he have acted the same way? Or is it something else, simple human decency which is above any ideology? Write in the comments. I really want to hear every opinion. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because there are many more forgotten and amazing stories ahead that are worth knowing.